On my wedding night, I saw another me from 50 years in the future through the bronze mirror on the dressing table. The old woman in the mirror was in the same manor I had just married into. Blushing, I touched my hair. 50 years from now, will I be surrounded by family, living peacefully together? But the old woman only leaned against the dark bed in silence. Then, a yellowed painted portrait slipped from her sleeve and fell at her feet. I shyly said, "Is that the portrait Matthew promised me on our wedding night?" He said we would grow old together, hand in hand. Only then did the old woman scoff and slowly move closer to the mirror. I looked carefully. The woman in the portrait on the floor was Sabella, my closest friend. A chill went through me as my future self forced a bitter smile and stared straight at me. "The truth is that Sabella Lane was abducted and violated on your wedding night, and then she died. Because you stopped Matthew Cross, he became certain that you had sent people to do it. After that, he hated you and tortured you for 50 years. Gwendolyn Shaw, I have now revealed to you the truth ahead of time. Whether you still stop him from seeking out Sabella tonight or not is your choice." I froze where I stood, unable to believe a word of it. Matthew and I had known each other since childhood. After more than a decade together, everyone in the royal capital of Kingsport knew how much he cared for me. To marry me, he had barely passed the 2 trials my father had set for him. Then, he petitioned outside the Shaw estate for 3 days and nights before my father finally agreed. He had said he would never marry anyone but me. Sabella Lane was also my closest friend. She had not been in Kingsport for long, but we were alike in temperament. It wasn't long before we shared everything with each other. She knew Matthew was the only man in my heart. She had even once teased me by saying that if she were a man, she would fight Matthew for me. The two of them even got jealous over who could invite me out that day. To say they had been secretly involved with each other and that Matthew would torture me for 50 years because of her? What a ridiculous joke. I was about to argue with the old woman in the bronze mirror when the door to the bedchamber was suddenly shoved open from outside. The candles shook hard and nearly went out. My heart lurched as I hurriedly lowered the veil over my head again and grabbed the corners of my dress with both hands tightly. My heart was pounding, and I felt both nervous and shy. However, my husband did not comfort me gently, nor did he hand me the wedding cup that symbolized eternal union to seal our marriage. Instead, a large hand reached over and tore the veil from my head. The force was so great that it knocked my wedding hair ornaments away. The wedding night I had imagined countless times was shattered in that instant. I looked up in shock and saw Matthew, his face tight with fear and anxiety. A fine layer of sweat covered his forehead, and the eyes that had once held such tenderness for me now held only panic and urgency. He did not even glance at the face I had carefully made up for him as he held my shoulders tightly. "Gwendolyn. Sabella was abducted. I have to save her." My mind buzzed as if I had just suffered a blow. The old woman's words from the mirror echoed in my ears again, one by one. When Matthew saw my face go pale, he seemed to realize he had been too rough. His tone softened as he hurried to explain. "You and Sabella are closest friends. She means more to you than anyone. Of course, I can't stand by and do nothing." After he said that, there was a glint in his eyes as he glanced at me with guilt. The sight sent a chill down my spine, and I couldn't help but shiver. So, everything the old woman had said was true. All my questions and refusals died immediately. I lowered my eyes, hid every emotion, then looked up again with a calm face. "All right." My voice was very soft, but he heard it clearly enough. Matthew had thought I would cry, make a scene, or even try to stop him, so he had already prepared what he would say to soothe me. "I know tonight is our wedding night, but a life is at stake. You wouldn't feel at ease if we sent someone else to find her." Halfway through, he stopped and stared at me in disbelief. "What did you say? You agree?" I nodded and pulled myself free of his hands, then I pushed him toward the door. "You're right. A life is at stake, and Sabella is my closest friend. No matter how you look at it, you should go and save her. Make haste. You must bring Sabella back safely. Take as many of the estate's guards as you need. The more people, the better. Go. Do not delay." The more generous and understanding I acted, the more confused Matthew became. He stared at me for a long time. Only when I urged him again did he snap out of it. His need to save Sabella overcame every doubt. He no longer hesitated and walked out of the room. "Gwendolyn, wait for me." Matthew left those words behind in a hurry, and he soon vanished into the night. But the moment he turned away, my expression turned cold. The noise outside slowly faded. I stood there quietly, listening as he gathered men and rode away at full speed. The candles in our bedchamber still burned, but it felt unbearably ironic. I turned and walked toward the bronze mirror. In the mirror, I still wore my wedding hair ornaments and gown. I looked dazzling, but the icy look in my eyes could send a chill down anyone's spine. I took out a carrier pigeon and wrote a letter. Then, I raised my voice and ordered the people outside. Prepare a carriage and follow the Marquis. The carriage raced through the night. I sat upright inside, holding the bronze mirror tightly in both hands. In the mirror, the old face from my future 50 years later remained clear. Her hoarse voice sounded faintly beside my ear. On my wedding night, I refused to let Matthew leave no matter what. I cried and made a scene. I said that if he dared abandon me on our wedding night, he would humiliate the general of Ironwall's household and make me the laughingstock of the capital. I forced him until he had no choice but to stay and complete the rest of the ceremony with me. I kept him trapped in the bedchamber, and he did not go out all night. I listened in silence, my heart growing colder and colder. But I never expected Sabella to appear at the estate's gates the next day, her clothes torn and her body covered in injuries. She did not die, but what happened to her was worse than death. Everyone said I was a jealous woman who had deliberately delayed him to cause her so much suffering. Matthew. He hated me to the bone from that day on. After the old woman finished, I sank into even deeper confusion. From what I knew about Sabella, there was a strong chance that she had staged this abduction herself. Sabella had pulled these pranks more than once over the years, and every time, Matthew used me as an excuse to find her. I had foolishly thought he cared about her because she mattered to me. It turned out the two had been involved for a long time. But if my future self was right, why had the matter ended so tragically? Before I could think it through, the carriage stopped sharply. A personal guard reported quietly from outside the carriage. My lady, Lord Matthew is inside the abandoned temple ahead. I raised the curtain at once, and a cold wind rushed in, clearing my head. Not far away, torches lit up the abandoned temple, and the estate guards had surrounded it so that no one could get through. I hurried over and immediately saw Sabella with a blade pressed to her neck. She was wearing white. Her hair was loose and messy, and she looked fragile enough to break as she cried. Matthew, I'm so scared. Her voice trembled, but her eyes passed over Matthew and landed on me. Gwendolyn, I'm sorry. This is all my fault. I shouldn't have played this kind of joke on you. I ruined your wedding night. She cried beautifully, and she absolved herself of blame with those words. Matthew's heart nearly broke as he listened. He roared at the bandit. Let her go. I'll give you whatever you want. The bandit holding Sabella only looked fierce. The truth was that he was already rattled after being surrounded by so many people. The blade in his hand pressed closer to Sabella's neck, and a line of blood immediately seeped from Sabella's pale skin. I want 100,000 silver coins. Not one coin less. Bring it now. Fine. I'll give it to you. I'll gather the silver at once. When Matthew saw Sabella bleeding, he completely lost his composure and agreed repeatedly. He suddenly turned and grabbed my hand, then spoke in an urgent tone. Gwendolyn, you heard him. 100,000 silver coins. Agree to it first. The general's household is wealthy, and your wedding gift should be enough. I looked at his red eyes. A life was at stake, so of course I would not refuse. Just as I was about to nod, Sabella suddenly screamed. The bandit was already nervous. When she startled him, his hand shook, and the blade cut deeper. Why are you screaming, you witch? I'll kill you. No. Seeing that the bandit was about to kill Sabella, Matthew's eyes turned red. Then, he did something I would never forget. He grabbed my arm without hesitation and shoved me hard toward the bandit. I stumbled forward under that terrible force and crashed straight into the bandit's arms. The cold blade instantly pressed against my neck. The husband who had just taken my hand during our wedding used that opening to snatch Sabella back from the bandit and hold her tightly in his arms. He did not even spare a look at me as he lowered his voice to calm the trembling woman in his arms. Don't be afraid, Sabella. You're safe now. Even the bandit froze, not expecting the hostage to be switched like this. Then, Matthew's cold voice came, each word cutting into my heart. I'm exchanging her with Sabella. My wife is Gwendolyn Shaw, the only daughter of the General of Ironwall. Forget 100,000 silver coins. As long as she's alive, the General will even pay 1,000,000 silver coins for her. In that instant, I could feel the chill in my bones. Oh, how cold the bitter frost traveling through my veins was. The person I loved most had pushed me into the bandit's hands for the sake of my closest friend. I felt the edge of the blade against my neck, but I was not afraid at all. It was said that there was no greater sorrow than a dead heart. This was probably what that meant. When the bandit saw that he had me in his hands, the panic in his eyes turned vicious. He grinned and pressed the blade tighter against my neck. His foul breath brushed my ear as he spoke in a voice only I could hear. The legitimate daughter of the General of Ironwall? If you want to blame someone, blame it on the person who paid a high price for your life. My heart skipped a beat as I sensed the killing intent surging inside of him. The bandit raised his sword, but at the last second, I used all my strength and bit hard into the wrist that held me. The bandit screamed in pain, and his grip loosened. At that exact moment, a feathered arrow shrieked through the air. Matthew had not come to save me. Instead, his arrow came flying at me. The sharp arrow pierced through my left shoulder blade, then buried itself deep in the bandit's chest behind me while my blood flowed. The pain in my shoulder made my vision go black. I had gone through martial training with my father since childhood, and that shoulder had been badly injured before. Matthew knew that, yet he still aimed for it. I might never draw a bow or wield a sword again. I stared at Matthew in disbelief. He stood not far away, still holding the bow he had used to shoot me. For Sabella, he could push me out as a hostage. Now, he had used my body as a shield, shooting through me before injuring the enemy. The bandit clearly had not expected him to be so ruthless either. Clutching his chest, he slipped into the hidden passage behind the abandoned temple and vanished when he saw that things were going badly. Matthew instinctively ran toward me, as if he wanted to catch me before I collapsed. Matthew, I'm so scared. I'm bleeding so much. Sabella's pitiful sobs made him stop in his tracks. He hesitated for only a moment before turning around and lifting Sabella into his arms. As for me, blood poured from my shoulder blade as I collapsed onto the ground and lost consciousness. In the darkness, memories surged like a tide. I remembered how Matthew had faced the 2 trials my father had set for him so that he could marry me. The first attempt was to gather 100,000 silver coins within 7 days. I was the one who had secretly taken out the deeds my mother had left me as security and helped him gather that huge sum. The second attempt was to go to the snowy peak in the far north and bring back the legendary frost rose. He had nearly frozen to death on the mountain and barely escaped with his life. In the end, he had brought back only a few frost rose seeds. Although neither trial had been completed perfectly, he petitioned outside the estate for 3 days and nights in the snowstorm. I petitioned alongside him inside the gates for 3 days and nights too. Only then did my father soften and agree to our marriage. I had always thought marrying a good man was the greatest blessing of my life. Only now did I realize that I had spent all these years looking at nothing but lies. A sharp pain in my shoulder blade woke me from my sleep. I opened my eyes, but there was no one beside me. Only the bronze mirror that connected to the future was safely placed beside my bed. The old woman in the mirror looked at my miserable state and chuckled twice. Foolish child. Matthew ignored and tortured me for 5 decades, and I only learned the truth yesterday. Sabella never died. He kept her in another estate, hidden away as his mistress for 50 full years. They lived happily together surrounded by children and grandchildren, while I lived with guilt and blame for hurting my closest friend. I spent my life with only a rosary and prayer books for company, alone and miserable. I listened quietly to her accusation. Every word was soaked in blood. However, my heart no longer stirred. The 100,000 silver coins you gathered for him became the wealth he used to support Sabella. And back then, it wasn't that he failed to bring back the frost rose during his trip to the snowy mountain. He gave the frost rose that could cure every poison and heal any wound to Sabella. I walked out of the room in a daze. The sharp pain in my left shoulder reminded me that none of this was a dream. I ignored everyone who tried to stop me and went straight to the estate's main courtyard. It was time to end everything today. I saw Matthew bowing before his mother from afar. Sabella stood beside him, weeping pitifully. Mother, I've decided. I won't ever fail Sabella again. Please allow me to make Sabella my second wife. When they saw me arrive, both their faces froze as they hesitated. Still, I forced myself to show a faint smile. Why go through so much trouble? Why not give Sabella my place as the lady of your household instead? At my words, Matthew frowned and quickly walked up to me. Gwendolyn, stop this. He reached out to pull me close, but I avoided him in disgust. I hit his hand away and said, Matthew, we'll have a divorce. That will make room for the 2 of you. The entire courtyard fell into dead silence as Matthew's face filled with disbelief. He thought I was only acting out in anger. Gwendolyn, I know you're upset about yesterday, but you're proficient in martial skills. You could take it. But Sabella is delicate. She would die. I looked at Matthew with red eyes. Did he know that his shove and his arrow last night had rendered me unable to ever fight again? Sabella began crying at just the right time. Then, she grabbed my hand. Gwendolyn, I was only upset that you wouldn't stay with me on your wedding night. I got a little jealous and went out to clear my head. Who could have expected bandits would abduct me? The situation was bad, and Matthew only came to save me for your sake. You must not be angry with him. With those words, she made herself seem generous and made me seem petty. As expected, her words provoked Matthew. His brows furrowed, and he became extremely impatient with me. Gwendolyn, when did you become so heartless? Sabella is your closest friend. Last night, I held her in front of so many people, so of course I have to take responsibility for her. Do you want Sabella to spend the rest of her life without pride in Kingsport? I did not want to waste another word on them, so I pushed Sabella away. I had barely used any strength, yet Sabella staggered and fell to the ground. Gwendolyn, are you truly unwilling to forgive us? Sabella's tearful accusation enraged Matthew completely. Matthew helped Sabella up and walked over to me. His eyes were red, and he raised his hand to slap me. Gwendolyn. How dare you dash? It was at that moment that a cold voice cut through the commotion from outside the courtyard's entrance. That's quite an impressive display of power, Lord Matthew. The air in the main courtyard froze. Standing at the arched gateway was a tall, imposing figure clad in dark indigo robes, flanked by 2 rows of iron-armored guards from the Iron Wall generals. Estate. His face was weathered by decades of desert winds and battlefield bloodshed, his eyes cold as flint as he swept his gaze across the courtyard. It was my father, General Justinian Shaw, the Iron Wall General of Kingsport. Matthew's hand remained suspended in midair, trembling slightly. The terrifying aura radiating from my father made his breath catch in his throat. Beside him, Sabella's fake tears instantly dried up, her face draining of color. Father. I called out softly, stepping around Matthew. Justinian Shaw did not even glance at Matthew or Sabella. His fierce, sharp eyes fell straight onto my left shoulder. Though I wore a clean outer robe, the faint crimson stain seeping through the heavy bandages could not be hidden from a veteran soldier who had spent his life on the battlefield. In 3 heavy strides, my father reached my side. He lifted his hand, a hand rough with calluses, and gently hovered over my shoulder, his voice thick with suppressed fury. Who did this? Father, it's nothing, Matthew hastily began, stepping forward with a pale smile. Last night, bandits raided the mountain temple. I was forced to act to save lives, and in the confusion, Gwendolyn was accidentally hit by a stray arrow. It's just a minor flesh wound. Clang. Before Matthew could finish his lie, the captain of the Iron Wall Guard stepped forward and slammed the pommel of his broadsword onto the stone paving. I looked at Matthew, my lips curving into a cold, mocking smile. A minor flesh wound? Lord Matthew, why don't you tell my father which direction that arrow came from? Tell him who held the bow, and whose body was used as a human shield. So you could pull Sabella to safety. Gwendolyn. What absurdity are you speaking? Matthew's mother, the Dowager Marchioness, finally snapped, stepping out from the hall with her silver cane. Matthew did it to save your friend. You are the daughter of a military family, accustomed to roughing it. Sabella is delicate and helpless. How can you be so narrow-minded and vengeful on your 2nd day of marriage? Narrow-minded? I turned to face the Dowager Marchioness, my eyes devoid of warmth. Yesterday, before the wedding cup was even shared, your son abandoned his bride to chase after another woman. When faced with bandits, he pushed his wedded wife into the blade of a murderer. And to take Sabella back, he shot an arrow straight through my shoulder blade. I pulled back the collar of my robe slightly, revealing the thick, blood-soaked bandages beneath and the blackish-purple bruising around the entry wound. The doctor told me this morning that the tendon in my left shoulder is completely severed, I said, my voice quiet, echoing across the quiet courtyard. The Shaw family's iron bow, which I have pulled since the age of 8, will never be drawn by my hand again. Is this what the Cross family calls a minor flesh wound? Justinian Shaw's eyes turned crimson with rage. A terrible, suffocating pressure exploded from him. In one swift movement, he unsheathed the heavy longsword at his hip and slammed the flat of the blade directly against Matthew's chest. Bang! Matthew gasped in pain and was thrown back 3 feet, falling awkwardly onto the stone steps. Sabella shrieked in terror and shrank into the corner, covering her mouth. Justinian Shaw. How dare you strike the Marquis in his own estate, the Dowager Marchioness screamed, trembling with anger. Striking him? Justinian Shaw's voice sounded like thunder over a battlefield. If my daughter hadn't sent me a carrier pigeon last night, I wouldn't have known that my only child was being slaughtered by this ungrateful beast in your Cross Manor. My father looked down at Matthew, who was clutching his chest and coughing blood, his eyes burning with absolute contempt. 10 years ago, your father died on the southern border, and the Cross family was stripped of its military command. Who helped your estate retain its title? It was the Shaw family. To marry my daughter, you knelt outside my gates for 3 days and nights, swearing you would treat her like your own soul. And today, on her wedding night, you pushed her into a blade and shot her with an arrow for the sake of an outsider? Matthew struggled to sit up, his face pale as chalk. He looked at me, then at my father's gleaming blade, terror finally creeping into his eyes. Father-in-law, no, General. Listen to me. I only did it out of desperation. Sabella was in danger. Silence. I interrupted him coldly, stepping forward until I stood beside my father. I pulled a rolled scroll of heavy crimson paper from my sleeve, the marriage certificate that had been stamped by the Royal Imperial Court only yesterday. Matthew Cross, you do not need to explain anymore, I said, my voice dead and emotionless. From this moment on, the Shaw family and the Cross family are dead to each other. With a sharp rip, I tore the crimson paper in half right before his eyes. This is the deed of annulment. Today, Gwendolyn Shaw divorces Matthew Cross. Divorce? The Dowager Marchioness gasped, clutching her chest as if she might faint. Gwendolyn Shaw. Have you lost your mind? A woman divorcing her husband? You will be shamed by the entire capital. Shamed? I turned my head, my gaze as cold as ice. The ones who should be shamed are the hypocrites sitting in this manor. Sabella, seeing the situation spiraling out of control, crawled forward on her knees, her eyes brimming with tears. Gwendolyn, please, don't do this. If you hate someone, hate me. It was all my fault. I shouldn't have been born, I shouldn't have been saved. I will leave Kingsport right now. I will never see Matthew again. Please don't ruin your marriage because of me. She wept so bitterly, looking so fragile and pitiable, just as she always did. In the past, whenever she put on this display, I would immediately soft-heartedly comfort her, believing every word she said. Now, looking at her, I felt only disgust. Sabella Lane, I said slowly, walking over to stand directly over her. Do you really think I don't know what you were doing? Sabella's crying froze for a fraction of a second. You said you went out last night because you were jealous and wanted to clear your head, I continued, my voice echoing in the dead silence of the yard. Then, tell me, why did the bandits who took you happen to be waiting at the exact deserted trail outside the city that you chose to walk down? Why did they capture you without harming a single hair on your head, yet demand 100,000 silver coins the moment Matthew arrived? Sabella's face turned paper white. I don't know. They were just ruthless criminals. And one more thing, I interrupted her, turning my eyes to Matthew. To marry me, Matthew had to pass 2 trials set by my father. The first was to gather 100,000 silver coins in 7 days. He claimed he earned it through his family's business connections. But the truth? He took the deeds to my late mother's dowry estates, used my name to pledge them at the Royal Bank, and raised the money. Matthew's eyes widened in horror. Gwendolyn, how did you? And the second trial, I continued, stepping closer to Matthew, my tone chillingly calm. To retrieve the frost rose from the northern snowy peak. You came back half frozen, holding a box of dead seeds, crying that the flower had withered on the way down. But the real frost rose, the legendary flower that cures all poisons and heals all inner injuries, where did it actually go? I turned my head and fixed my gaze sharply on Sabella's neck. Under her collar, a faint, glowing pink petal-shaped mark was barely visible. Near her collarbone, the exact physical mark left behind by someone who had consumed a fresh frost rose. 3 years ago, Sabella suffered from a lung ailment, I said softly. You took the frost rose that belonged to my family's trial, risked your life to climb the mountain, and fed it to her, didn't you, Matthew? Matthew sat frozen on the ground, his mouth open, unable to utter a single word. The entire courtyard was silent as a tomb. The guards, the servant girls, and even the Dowager Marchioness looked at Matthew and Sabella in utter shock. You used my mother's money to build your reputation. You took the life-saving herb meant for our marriage and gave it to your mistress. And on our wedding Night, you combined forces with her to play out a dramatic scene of heroics, turning me into a victim and shooting me through the shoulder. I looked at Matthew, feeling the final trace of affection in my heart turn into ash. Matthew Cross, you are not a man. You are a leech who fed on my blood while plotting my destruction. General Shaw, I turned to my father, bowing deeply. Please order our men to enter the Cross family treasury and confiscate all property belonging to the Shaw family dowry. Furthermore, notify the Royal Bank to immediately recall the mortgage on my mother's estates. Justinian Shaw's face was dark as a thundercloud. Execute my daughter's orders. Yes, General. Dozens of armored guards immediately poured into the estate like a silver tide, taking control of every hall and storage room. You can't do this. This is the Marquis's manor, the Dowager Marchioness shrieked, falling to her knees. Gwendolyn Shaw, you are forcing our family into ruin. Forcing you into ruin? I looked down at her coldly. No. I am simply taking back what was mine. As for the debts you owe, you can pay them back slowly over the next 50 years. By noon, the news of the Iron Wall General's daughter tearing up her marriage certificate and raiding the Cross Manor had spread across the entire capital of Kingsport like wildfire. The story of how Matthew Cross used his bride's dowry to play the generous hero and shot his own wife for the sake of his fragile friend became the biggest scandal in the empire. Inside the Shaw Manor's quiet courtyard, I sat before the dressing table, looking at the bronze mirror. The surface of the mirror flickered. The withered, old woman from 50 years in the future appeared once more. But this time, the dark, suffocating bedroom behind her was gone. The yellowed portrait of Sabella on the floor was burning away into ashes. The old woman looked at me, a tear slipping down her wrinkled cheek, but a soft, relieved smile graced her lips. You did it, Gwendolyn, she whispered, her voice no longer hoarse and bitter, but light, as if a weight carried for half a century had finally been lifted. You broke the cycle. Thank you, I murmured, touching the surface of the bronze mirror. Without your warning, I would have been blinded by his sweet words forever. Be careful. The old woman warned softly, her figure beginning to fade into glowing light. Sabella Lane is far more dangerous than you think. The abduction last night was not just a trick to draw Matthew away. She wanted you dead. I know, I said, my eyes darkening. And I will make sure she pays for every drop of blood I lost. The mirror shimmered one last time, returning to a normal, reflective bronze. The future had been altered. The 50 years of nightmare were erased. At that moment, the door to my room was pushed open. My father's chief lieutenant, Commander Vance, walked in and knelt on one knee. Young lady, we have captured the bandit leader who escaped into the secret passage last night. My eyes sharpened. Where is he? In the dungeon. General Shaw is already interrogating him. I tied my cloak over my injured shoulder and walked straight to the underground cells. The dungeon was damp and cold, illuminated by flickering torches. The bandit leader was chained to an iron pillar, his chest wrapped in bloody rags where Matthew's arrow had pierced him. When he saw me walk in, his eyes filled with fear. Justinian Shaw sat on a wooden chair nearby, holding a blood-stained confession scroll. He tossed it onto the table in front of me. Read it yourself, Gwendolyn. I picked up the scroll. As my eyes swept across the ink, my expression grew colder and colder. The confession was damning. 3 days before the wedding, Sabella Lane had secretly met with the leader of the Black Mountain Bandits. She paid them 5,000 gold coins, funded by a loan she had taken out using Matthew's name, to stage an abduction at the abandoned temple on the night of the wedding. Her original instructions to the bandits were simple: if Matthew came alone, they were to play out a dramatic rescue, allowing Sabella to play the traumatized victim so Matthew would take her into his estate as a concubine out of guilt. However, Sabella had given the bandit leader a second, secret order. If Gwendolyn Shaw came along, the bandits were to deliberately create chaos and kill Gwendolyn on the spot. She promised me another 10,000 silver coins if the general's daughter died in the chaos. The bandit leader whimpered, spitting out blood. She said as long as Gwendolyn died, the general's wealth would eventually fall into Marquis Cross's hands, and she would become the new Marchioness. My fingers tightened around the paper until it crumpled in my grip. So that was the truth. In the original timeline, because my future self had forced Matthew to stay in the bedchamber, Sabella's backup plan had failed. She was left alone with the bandits, who felt betrayed and abused her in rage, ruining her life. That was why she appeared at the estate gates the next day covered in blood. And Matthew, completely ignorant of Sabella's evil conspiracy, blamed me for her tragedy, tormenting me for 50 years while holding the real viper in his arms. What a tragic, foolish joke, I laughed softly, a laughter devoid of any warmth. Gwendolyn, my father said, his voice cold as steel. This is no longer just a domestic dispute. This is attempted murder against the daughter of a first-rank general of the Empire. I can take this confession straight to the Imperial Palace and have Sabella Lane executed by morning. No, father, I said, turning to look at him. Executing her so quickly would be too merciful. What do you plan to do? Sabella loves power, wealth, and Matthew's devoted affection, doesn't she? I smiled coldly. I want her to watch everything she schemed for turn into dust. I want her and Matthew to destroy each other. 3 days later, the financial storm hit the Cross Manor like a tidal wave. Without the backing of the Shaw family and with the Royal Bank calling in all mortgages immediately, the Cross family's fragile finances collapsed overnight. Matthew had used the estate's funds to buy luxury gifts, jewelry, and private manors for Sabella over the past 3 years, leaving the estate's treasury completely empty. Now, with creditors pounding on his front doors demanding the return of 100,000 silver coins, Matthew was forced to sell off his family's shops, horses, and even his mother's antique jewelry. Worse yet, the stories of Matthew's cowardice and betrayal had spread to the imperial court. The emperor, furious at Matthew's disrespect toward a loyal general, stripped Matthew of his imperial position in the military bureau. In just 3 days, the proud Marquis Cross became the laughingstock and debtor of Kingsport. Late one rainy evening, I was reading military reports in the Shaw Manor's study when a servant rushed in. Young lady, Lord Matthew, no, Matthew Cross is outside the main gates. He has been kneeling in the rain for 2 hours, begging to see you. I did not even raise my head from my book. Let him kneel. Gwendolyn. A desperate voice suddenly echoed from the courtyard outside. Matthew had bypassed the guards and burst into the inner garden, soaked from head to toe. His clothes mud-stained, looking like a drowned rat. The guards immediately rushed forward, pressing him onto his knees before my study doors. Gwendolyn. Please, hear me out. Matthew cried, his voice hoarse and breaking. He looked up at me through the rain, his eyes filled with bloodshot desperation. I was wrong. I was completely tricked by that woman. I walked slowly out onto the covered porch, holding a dark umbrella, looking down at him coldly. Tricked? Yes. Sabella. Matthew shouted, his tears mixing with the rain. I went back to search her quarters today. I found her ledgers. She has been stealing money from my estate for 3 years. She was sending funds out of the city to her brother. And the abduction that night, she paid those bandits herself. He pounded his fists onto the wet flagstones, sobbing bitterly. She set it all up. She used me. She wanted to hurt you. Gwendolyn, I didn't know. I truly didn't know she was such a monster. I thought she was innocent and helpless. I looked at his miserable appearance, feeling neither anger nor joy, only a deep, hollow disgust. Matthew, I said softly, my voice cutting through the sound of falling rain. Do you really think you are innocent? Matthew froze, looking up at me in confusion. Even if Sabella planned the abduction, I said, stepping closer to the edge of the porch, was it Sabella who forced you to shove me toward the bandit's blade? Was it Sabella who made you draw your bow and shoot an arrow through my shoulder blade? Was it Sabella who made you take my mother's property to pay for your vanity? Matthew's face turned deathly pale. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. No, Matthew, I said coldly. Sabella only provided the stage. The cowardice, the selfishness, and the cruelty, those were all yours. Gwendolyn. Matthew crawled forward on his knees, reaching out his trembling hands to grab the hem of my dress. We grew up together. 10 years of affection. How can you be so heartless? I loved you. I fought for 3 days in the snow to marry you. You loved me? I chuckled softly, pulling my dress back out of his reach. You loved the military power of the Shaw family. You loved the status my father's reputation gave you. The moment a conflict arose, you sacrificed my body and my life without a second thought. I looked down at him, my eyes filled with absolute icy contempt. Do you know what my biggest regret is, Matthew? It's that I once knelt in the snow alongside you, believing you were a man worth giving my life to. I turned to the guards. Throw him out. If he sets foot near the Shaw Manor again, break his legs. Gwendolyn. Gwendolyn. Matthew screamed as the armored guards dragged him away. Across the muddy ground, his cries echoing pathetically into the rainy night. While Matthew was kneeling in the rain at my gates, Sabella was packing her bags. Inside a quiet, secluded residence on the outskirts of Kingsport, a house Matthew had secretly bought for her, Sabella was frantically stuffing gold jewelry, silver bars, and deeds into heavy leather chests. Faster. Hurry up, she urged her maidservant, her face pale with anxiety. The carriage must leave before dawn. If we get to the southern ports, we can board a ship for the southern provinces. Sabella was no fool. She knew that once the Shaw family investigated the bandits, her secret would be exposed. With Matthew now ruined and powerless, he could no longer protect her. Her only choice was to take all the wealth she had drained from Matthew over the years and flee the capital. Where are you planning to go, Sabella? A cold, familiar voice suddenly sounded from the doorway. Sabella gasped, dropping a jade bracelet onto the floor. It shattered into pieces. She turned around in horror to see Matthew standing at the door. He was soaked through, covered in mud, his eyes bloodshot and filled with a terrifying, unhinged madness. Behind him stood 6 iron-armored guards from the Iron Wall General's estate. Matthew? Sabella stammered, forcing a pale, trembling smile as she backed away. Why? Why are you here? You're soaking wet, let me get a towel. You were leaving? Matthew walked slowly into the room, his eyes fixed on the open chests filled with gold and jewels. With my family's money? With the gold I bought you while my own estate collapsed into debt? No. Matthew, listen to me. Sabella cried, backing into the wall. I was just packing these to sell them. To help you pay off the debts. Liars. Matthew roared, lunging forward and grabbing Sabella by her hair, slamming her against the table. Ah! Sabella screamed in agony. You venomous snake. Matthew's face was twisted in rage as he slapped her repeatedly across the face. I gave you everything. I took the frost rose from Gwendolyn to cure your lungs. I gave you my family's wealth. And you planned an abduction to murder Gwendolyn and frame me? You ruined my marriage. You ruined my title. You ruined my life. Matthew. Let go of me. You coward. Sabella, dropping her act of fragility, fought back viciously, clawing at Matthew's face with her sharp fingernails, leaving bloody gashes across his cheeks. You think you're innocent? You're the one who shot Gwendolyn. You're the one who pushed her into the blade. You wanted her dead just as much as I did so you could claim her family's military power. You hypocrite. Shut up. Shut up. Matthew screamed, grabbing her throat and pressing her onto the floor. The two of them tumbled across the room, biting, scratching, and tearing at each other like rabid dogs, destroying the very luxury items they had once cherished. Standing outside the door, Commander Vance watched the brutal spectacle with utter indifference. Once they were both beaten bloody, exhausted, and barely breathing on the floor, Commander Vance stepped forward and held up a royal decree from the Imperial Palace. Sabella Lane, Matthew Cross, Vance declared coldly. By order of the Emperor and the High Court of Justice, you are both arrested for conspiracy, attempted murder of a first-rank noble, and high treason against the Iron Wall military. Sabella, lying in a pool of her own blood, looked at the guards in terror. No, no. I'm innocent. It was all Matthew. Take them away. Vance ordered. As the guards dragged them both out into the night, Sabella and Matthew looked at each other with pure, unadulterated hatred. The pure love they had shared, built on lies, betrayal, and bloodshed, had finally descended into a hell of their own making. A month later, The imperial decree was officially executed. Sabella Lane was sentenced to perpetual exile in the far northern border. Mines, the very place where the cold was bitter enough to freeze bone, a place where she would spend the rest of her short life doing heavy labor until her lungs gave out. Matthew Cross was stripped of his noble title, his estate was confiscated to pay off his massive debts, and he was permanently banished from Kingsport, reduced to a homeless beggar living on the streets of remote provinces, spurned by everyone who recognized his name. The Dowager Marchioness, unable to bear the shame and loss of wealth, suffered a stroke and was left bedridden in a small, damp rented room outside the city walls. The Cross family had completely ceased to exist. On a bright, crisp autumn morning, sunlight washed over the martial training grounds of the Shaw Manor. I stood in the center of the field, wearing a simple red training robe. Though the tendon in my left shoulder was damaged and I could no longer pull the heavy iron bow, I held a light silver sword in my right hand. Swish! The sword cut through the air like a flash of lightning, creating a sharp, whistling wind. My father stood at the edge of the grounds, watching me with a warm, proud smile. Beside him stood a young lieutenant, who looked at my sword technique with deep admiration. "Your sword strikes are getting faster, Gwendolyn," my father said, walking over and handing me a clean towel. "If I cannot pull a bow, I will master the sword with one hand," I smiled, wiping the sweat from my brow. "The daughter of the Shaw family will never become a helpless victim." After training, I returned to my bedchamber. The room was bright and filled with the gentle scent of blooming osmanthus flowers. I walked over to the dressing table and uncovered the bronze mirror. The ancient bronze surface was completely clear now. There was no old woman, no dark bedroom, no yellowed portrait, and no 50 years of agony. In the reflection, I saw only myself, young, vibrant, sharp-eyed, and full of life, standing under the bright autumn sun. I smiled at my reflection in the mirror. The past was gone, the scumbags were destroyed, and my future was finally entirely my own. I picked up my silver sword, turned away from the mirror, and stepped out into the broad, endless sunshine.